Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. Today is 600 episodes, and today for episode 600, we have a guy who we've heard about through the grapevine a little bit. It only took us 6 years and 600 episodes to get him on, but I'm excited to have him on. We got Mr. Todd Steakley. How are you doing, Todd?
Good. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Jacob, how are you?
I'm doing real good.
Episode 600.
600,
baby.
6.5 years into it.
Yeah, man.
Almost like on the dot, 6.5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, you're right. About 6.5 years. Wow, that's crazy. It's a lot of deer talk the last 6.5 years, man.
Some vulture talk, too, as one of our listeners' success stories mentioned.
Yeah, the buzzards.
The buzzard, that's
talk.
what it was. Yeah, turkey hunting. Todd, I was going to say, do you turkey hunt at all?
No, I don't at all.
Okay, yeah, so you're probably on the same page as that listener. Listener's like, I don't care. We had him on for listener success stories. I don't care anything about turkeys. He's like, you just get back to the deer talk.
Maybe one day, but I'll be in big trouble. Like in the turkey.
Spend enough time deer hunting. So,
Man, yeah.
So, Todd, I'm excited to get you on. So, I will give a shout out to one of our buddies and a listener of the podcast. And, of course, we found out, Todd, you're a big listener of the show as well. Josh Burnett, he had been mentioning you for years now.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, dude, you need to get my buddy on. He's legit. He's like, man, he hunts off the ground a whole bunch. He kills a lot of really good deer, just like a really good deer hunter. You ought to try to get him on the podcast. And at one time I talked to you, probably, I think it was like 2020 or 2021. You gave me like your phone number at the time. And I was like, man, I was thinking about it a couple weeks ago. I was like, man, I need to reach back out to him. And I went to text you and went through Green. I was like, okay. And I'm like, let me just try to give him a call. Okay, been a few days. And it calls like, phone number's deactivated. I'm like, crap. So I had to reach back out to Josh. I was like, hey, man, can you hook me back up? And so he gave me your number. And of course, we're here now. So, Todd, I do want to kind of kick us off by asking you, if you had to describe your hunting style and kind of what we're going to be talking about today, which is ground hunting, how would you go about describing what you do and kind of like what you enjoy to do and have success doing?
More of like a hybrid ghillie / saddle hunting, just mobile. I prefer ghillie if I can.
So ghillie suit on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, and you actually brought a couple of ghillie suits. We're going to talk about this because this is a conversation. I was telling you, the only other guest that we've had on the podcast that really has been doing this style of hunting, ground hunting with a ghillie suit in the Southeast, was Travis Murray. He's been on a few times in the past, and he's been doing it for years and having tremendous success hunting on the ground. And he was the first one that we kind of had this conversation with. And, we had listeners write in talking about that, man, that was a pretty cool episode, but it's nice to kind of see another guy, again, being able to do this, and you're having a lot of success. So I want to get into why ghillie suit hunting, why using a ghillie. How did you even get to that point versus, say, hunting a tree stand, a climber, like probably how you probably grew up hunting?
Well, primarily, if you really think about the ghillie concept, they've been used in the military for years. And if a person, say a spotter that's looking for another sniper in a ghillie suit, if they can't find the sniper in the ghillie suit, a deer, it's going to be hard for a deer to see it. So, you kind of start thinking, what will be the next level I can get to where I can go undetected, so that's where the ghillie concept comes in.
And you're also ex-military as well.
That's correct.
Yeah, so, kind of coming from this, when you brought that up to me, I didn't know you were ex-military until today. You brought that up. So, again, this is like something that you've been implementing for how many years now?
Primarily 5 to 6.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, with that, this is what I want to kind of get to. You've been doing it for 5 to 6 years. How were you hunting previously before that? Because I'm sure you've been a big deer hunter for a long time. But what was that transition? I know you were talking about like the concept of military, the spotters and snipers. And if it's hard enough for a spotter to find it, of course it's gonna be hard for a deer to spot someone as well. Mm-hmm. But how did that concept come up? I mean, was it just, did you start realizing based off trail cameras that the deer were using different areas, or like what got you to that point?
It's just toting around all this gear all day long. What was eventually happening with me, I would tote like my sticks, wear my saddle, and I'd end up walking around all day long with it. And I got to think, and I had more encounters because I'll wear my ghillie suit with, my backpack. And I was having more encounters, just walking in and walking around, even with all my gear on my back because had my ghillie on. Then I was like, man, what am I doing? Why am I carrying all this gear around, 40, 50 pounds of gear when I could just leave all that at the truck and just walk around the woods with my ghillie, and relax and not be under a pressure of getting up in a tree, So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, So
With your style of ghillie suit hunting, you're hunting in like pine thickets and stuff, right? We were talking about that a little bit before, but it's not like you're out in the open hardwoods. Like you're getting in there with them.
Oh yeah.
Okay, that excites me.
Oh yeah.
It's because like how often, I'm sure you're probably like this too, but how often have you ever been there and you're hunting, maybe in an SMZ or so, you're hunting in like the pretty woods as we would call it, and you're just like over there looking at that pine thicket, and you know that they're in there, and you're just like, man, if I could just like get in there and hunt in there amongst them, maybe it'd be good. So are you primarily a bow hunter when it comes to hunting in those areas, or
Both.
rifle? Okay.
Both.
What's when it comes to bow hunting in there? I mean, what's that like? I mean, just from a hunting perspective, like I've always wondered that it's like, okay, you get in there and you get set up, which we're going to go deeper on all this, but I just kind of wanted to ask this right off the bat. Like, how are you setting up to get drawn on these deer and not get busted?
Well, with a rifle, you can, of course, you got a longer range. You don't have to do as much movement. With a bow, you got to be very careful. You got to brush yourself in more, like more back cover, kind of more of a shaded type area. You just kind of got to enclose yourself more to where, when you draw back on the deer, that your shadow, you have to worry about that, like when you pull back and your shadow from this, being from the sun. I try to get like in an area where it's more dark than more, sunlight. So mainly brushing yourself in, more back cover. That's about the only way you can do it with a bow. Unless you want to get busted. Mm-hmm. So it's a whole lot harder with a bow. But
yeah, another thing worth noting too, as we kind of get into the conversation, is you have done this tactic and you've been successful not only in pine country, pretty rough hill country, but also in swamps as well.
That's right.
Correct? Mm-hmm. And this buck behind you right here, he came from a swamp, right?
That's correct.
So here, let's show the camera this, by the way. So this one, there's this deer.
That's the hill country.
This is the hill country buck. I want to get the stories on these deer. So this big, as symmetrical as he can be. Nice 10-point. Beautiful buck. And then that big 8-point back there was from last season, correct?
Both of them. Yes.
Both of these. Mm-hmm. Now, did you kill both of these on the ground?
Both of them.
Really? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, which one did you shoot first?
The skull mount.
Okay.
The 10, yep.
All right. Let's get into the story of that deer. So, walk me through how that happened, how it went down.
Typically, just like I always do, pretty much I'll walk. Sometimes I'll walk until I get it like on some fresh sign. So I pretty much walked up on some fresh. I felt like pretty fresh scrapes and some real good rubs. Still the tree bark and stuff on the ground. It's an area I'm a little bit familiar with, and I've had a buck on camera, actually that buck and another buck on camera for, the past few seasons, but they kind of relocated because of some timber cuts. Kind of knew where, he was. So based on like drop-ins and, the rubs and scrapes, I decided, I'm just going to throw on my ghillie. I went and set up in a drainage. I was kind of like, my back was up on like a real steep drainage, and I was down with my feet in the water. I had rubber boots on, so I was kind of set up like up on a riverbank where I had to set up where I could watch the area I thought they might come out. But of course, you're watching one area and they always come out of another area. So I was thinking he was going to come out in front of me. That was usually the trails that I had him on camera and stuff coming out, but he came out from the right. So thank God I was paying attention, and I saw him come out from the right, out of the corner of my eye. So I just pushed myself up against the bank. He came out in front of me probably 20 some odd yards, working a scrape. Got a shot on him. Knew I hit him. I knew it was a fatal hit. Shot him, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to recover him till after season. So, found one drop of blood. Couldn't get a dog, to come track him, and I mean, it was absolutely the area that he ran. I mean, you'd have to have a bush hog to get through it. Terrible. Oh yeah. If I would have caught a dog out, they would come out there and probably turn me down and said, "No, man, we can't walk through that." I don't blame them. It was awful. So I waited till I was actually wanting to go hunt the other buck. I was kind of like right there on the prime time I needed to be in that area. So I kind of abandoned this buck thinking, well, I think I killed him. I just can't find him right now, but I'm going to come back after season, a few weeks later and maybe see if I can find him. So I went on, hunted this other buck. Then I came back, later on, toward the end of the season and found it.
So there's a lot we got to talk about specifically on how you like to approach hunting on the ground when it comes from sign, trail cameras, but also like the setups. Because when I'm looking at, me and Andrew hunt out of saddles. We've used climbers in the past, lock-ons as well, mobile hunting. And, sign's always a big factor. And it's also, finding like the best tree in the area. I look at ground hunting. I want you to kind of maybe clarify this for me. I look at ground hunting in some areas being a huge advantage, in other areas because of how thick it is, I almost feel like it could be a detriment just because of like seeing through cover instead of being elevated looking down through it. How do you handle that? Because again, you hunt such a wide range of like hill country, swampland, river bottoms, habitat, hunting a bunch of public land, and I'm sure you come across a bunch of different situations. So like, how have you been able to like, I guess, work through those situations? Again, getting on the ground and maybe having too much cover where you need to be instead of being elevated.
Now, that just depends on the situation. I do like getting up over, clear cut, the short pines, looking down in them, but one thing that I've kind of observed for the past few seasons, and I kind of think, in my head that this might be relevant, but I think a lot of the mature bucks, they associate like big trees with like danger. I know, they don't know it's a hunter, that they're actually out there being hunted. They just associate it, I believe, with danger. I mean, you can be in, a tree, any given time, and you see deer, they're looking up all the time. They're looking up for a reason. I think they've came accustomed, grown to looking up at trees, looking for hunters, from pressure. So that's one of the main reasons that I try to hunt more and on the ground. So
Now, when you're on the ground again, I'll kind of maybe you want to take a step back and look at it from how you scout, and then what exactly kind of setups do you feel confident, picking out when you're actually hunting on the ground? Because it doesn't sound like you're ever random, like you're just randomly walking to a spot. Like you have like purpose when you're in the woods. So, and then that'll probably answer a little bit more about how you set up and deal with, if you do need to get into a little bit thicker area, how you deal with like shooting, again, bow or a rifle in those areas. Mm-hmm. So walk us through specifically like your scouting methods. Like again, with the thought process, I'm going to be hunting on the ground more than likely based off where these bucks are living, because they're living in thicker cover. They're living in areas potentially I don't have a great shot opportunity if I am in a tree. And you and me talked on the phone yesterday about, early season in Alabama specifically, before the leaves come off, if you're hunting any places, especially with a lot of hardwoods, if you get above 10, maybe 12 to 15 feet, you're looking through the sub canopy down to the ground. Like you really are limited with your shot opportunities versus if you sat on the ground, you can see a little bit further in some of those areas. Mm-hmm. So how do you like to scout? How do you like to run trail cameras? Walk us through that thought process, and then we'll kind of get in a little bit more about what kind of sign you like to find in the hunting sets. But how do you like to scout and like maybe run trail cameras?
Yeah, usually on my, especially if I'm planning on, ghillie hunting, I'm going to post-season, scout that area because I want to see what it's going to look like during the time that I'm going to be there. And it's usually around the rut. So I kind of want to see what that area is going to look like, the vegetation and stuff and the cover. But usually I'll find a cover. I'll target in on some, my main thing, rubs. I feel like I have a whole lot more success hunting around big rubs. I'm talking about chest high rubs. I want to see multiple rubs too, not just one or two where they're just moving through the area. I want to know that buck. That's his little core area that he's spending some time there, and so I target in on a couple of those areas. And I'll go in and try to hang some cameras. Postseason, watch the cameras, see what kind of movement I got. Base all of my hunting on that. And usually, the areas that I pick out like that are usually going to be good areas. I've been fortunate enough to have some good bucks come in, on camera. So, I always, are going to do some postseason scouting, to go ahead and try to figure out where I'm going to be hunting.
So you're saying postseason scouting, you like finding big rubs, and then how are you're implementing trail cameras at the end of the season, trying to, I guess, locate some of these bucks because, of course, they don't lose their antlers down here until a lot of times March, or if not sometimes April.
That's correct.
So you have plenty of time. By the time Alabama season goes out February 10th, you still have a month plus potentially of finding deer, finding bucks with their antlers still on their head, identifying them and figuring out, if you can hunt that area. Now, you're talking about big rubs. Now, let me ask you, because, again, you hunt a wide range of habitat. Are you paying attention to certain rubs in certain habitat areas mean more to you than others? As in, if you're in a big hardwood drainage, you find a couple big rubs down there, is that as valuable as if it's closer to cover in a different area? Like, how are you justifying where you're putting those cameras in order to locate some of these bucks?
The way I determine if I'm going to hunt it or not, I'll kind of get down on my hands and knees, like at a deer's level. And if it looks thick on my hands and knees, and that's to me as a deer would be looking at it, that's going to be an area that I would target. If it's not thick, I'm staying away from it.
And you're not going to put a camera there. You're trying to associate finding that big sign in and around that thicker cover.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where you're more than likely going to try to catch a picture. Now, when you do that, you're postseason scout and you're really focused on rubs. Scrapes aren't very important for you.
The only bad thing about scrapes, one of the areas I like to hunt, it's usually underwater, and the scrapes are pretty limited. So,
okay.
Now I put my cameras usually on a mock scrape on certain areas, but further down south, I don't focus on any of that. But really, even central, or down south, I'm going to focus more on rubs.
Okay.
My personal opinion, I have more success. If I find, I'm talking big rubs. If I find big rubs, I'm usually going to be on a big deer.
Okay. So you're locating the big rubs, running trail cameras on those. Walk us through a little bit on once you are identifying that, hey, you get a really nice buck on camera, like whatever you're looking for when you're talking about like a mature buck, you get them on camera. How do you take that information in when it's 2, 3, 4 weeks after season and he's using an area versus where you may find him come that following season? Is he more than likely, do you feel like he's going to be in that general area, or is it more trying to relocate him, sometime early bow season?
Well, also too, during, when I'm out here scouting around, finding my, areas that I'm going to hunt, finding the rubs, I really, really want to find some sheds. If I find some good sheds, I mean, that's where that buck, that's his home. So, you're not going to have to set up too far off that. But, y'all know as well as I do how hard it is in Alabama to find some sheds. You find a shed, you're on the deer right there. So,
I want to ask as well, what do you consider thick? So if you're getting down on your hands and knees and you're looking through cover, I mean, are you looking for something that's like dog hair thick, or just you can't see more than 15, 20 yards?
Yeah, no more 15, 20 yards.
Okay.
It can be switchgrass. It don't even have to be any kind of certain vegetation. I've seen more buck movement in the tall switchgrass and the cutovers than probably I have anywhere, But it's just getting to them, that's the problem, So it don't, like I said, it don't have to be any type of certain vegetation. I really want to key in on, if it's a thick area that's got a lot of rubs in it, but I want it to have also, like the greenbrier, something for them to be able to stay around that area to eat where they don't have to get up out of it and move. So I think that's pretty important too.
Let me ask you this, because I know you like target mature bucks, and you tagged out last year in 3 really good deer. The other one you didn't bring because he's still at the taxidermist.
That's correct.
And that deer, was that in more of that hill country kind of land, or was that down? This Pine Hill. Okay, so the one thing I'm really interested in when we're talking about this is, have you found any specific situations that are that you can replicate of where you're going to find a mature buck? And what I mean is, like, do you see any similarities between where one buck's using an area when you're finding postseason, that if you find something similar like that on that same piece of public, you're probably going to find another mature buck? Or do you find any kind of similarities?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Can we talk about some of those similarities? I'm just real curious.
Okay.
Okay. What are just the outlying factors? Like, what does it have to have in order for a mature buck to be using and to survive, in order for him to get the age that you're looking for?
Usually there's going to be some sort of water source really, really close by. The majority of them is going to be in some sort of thicket, and you just don't see a lot of trees around it. There's going to be briars over your head. I mean, it's going to be stuff you can't even walk through. You'd think in your brain, like, man, there's not going to be any deer there. You can't even walk through it. But that's the type of environment that I figured out that they kind of really hone in on it, especially, public land, when they're being, pressured like they are. So you can go to just probably any public land in Alabama, and where you find the big bucks in the thickets, you go to the next WMA, they're going to be in the same type environment, same type thickets. So, yeah, I mean, there's a correlation with it for sure.
That makes me, that one big deer injury we were talking about before we hit record that I saw with Gavin, same situation.
Yeah.
It's a hellhole.
Yep.
It is.
Yes, it is.
Very little trees. And, like, even when we saw him, we had a rifle in our hands, and we're looking down on this deer. And all I could see, he raised up his rack to scratch his back, and I could see his right side and count 6 tines, not counting the brow tine, and they were all big tines and big long main beam. And, like, there was no, I mean, you would have had to take there's no way you could take an ethical shot because you couldn't see the body of the deer.
Oh, yeah.
When he was in that crap. And we were a good ways up above that deer, looking on that deer.
I mean, people, I think, a lot of people in Alabama, they're like, they'll go to a WMA and they're like, man, there's no deer there. They're just not hunting the right spot, but they're there. You just can't see them. It's so thick, I mean, some of the places that, that's holding up the big deer, some of them you just can't get to. I don't care what you do, what kind of hunter you are, you can't get to them unless you got a helicopter. So
that's exactly. I was about to bring that. You need a helicopter.
Yeah. Yes, yes. And a bush hog.
Yeah, for real.
Do
you ever walk the edge of those really, really thick areas and look for like a tunnel or just a trail coming out of that thing?
Oh, yeah.
You put cameras on that?
Oh,
that? Okay.
Yeah.
What's that process like for you? I mean, is that just like a jackpot money thing or what?
And what sign do you have to see associated with it? Like, do you have to see that tunnel with the big rub, or if you just find that big tunnel is being used?
A lot of times I find the big tunnel. I try to walk through it if I can, but usually, it just depends on where it's at. Usually you get about halfway through it, you have to turn around. But if I walk into the tunnel, one of the main things I want to look for in those type areas like that is droppings. And you'll know if the deer is going to be there in those thickets like that, because there will be droppings everywhere, which I'm sure y'all know too. So it would there's so many in these pine thickets and cutovers in Alabama. If you got out in the middle of one of them and looked around, there are trails. I'm talking everywhere, hundreds of trails. So unless you find like some big rubs, like there's some saplings that's been rubbed or whatever, I mean, personally, it's really hard to pin that down, which trail to sit up on. So now if you could get up above it, look down in it, and you kind of know an area where a big buck's been hanging out, of course, yeah.
Now, there was a place we hunted last year in Alabama that it's got mixed timber on it, and we were walking through some open timber. We were actually hunting with the dogs and woodcock hunting, and we hit we were working through some fairly open timber, open hardwoods, and we hit a logging road system that was just thick. Had privet on it like small pines growing up on it. It was just like it was a wall in that logging road. It must have been like an old road intersection where a couple different roads split off, and all that, like, there was no deer sign in the open hardwoods. And the second you got into that, it was just, I mean, intersections of trails and rubs and scrapes all come together in one spot. And that was one of those areas I was like, to hunt this, you almost would have to sit on the ground, because like if you got up in a tree, that deer could be 7, 8, 10 yards from you, and you can't see down through it. But when you get on the ground, you could see underneath some of that stuff. I mean, it's thick, but like it's more like visual obstruction. Like, you know, anything, if you were up elevated looking down into that area where all these intersections came through, like you wouldn't have been able to see a deer very well. But if you got on the ground, you could. And just the amount of sign, and the second you get back out of that, you cross through it, you know, go 20 yards, you come through the other side, there's nothing, no sign.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, that was one of those areas, now thinking about it, where it's like all this deer sign's pinching down to this one spot where they're all coming from these different areas, and they're coming to this one spot, and there's like 2 or 3 big scrapes there, a couple really big rubs that now looking back at it, probably would have been a spot you probably could have sat on the ground and probably done some calling and had some success maybe in a location like that.
Man, I would even bring a camera in there and try to, you know, put it on one of those little bitty trees, you know, if you could just get in there to it. But I'm not opposed to walking through an area like that, you know, at the end of the season, and, you know, if I jump a buck out of it, you know, I know where to come set up next year. Because, you know, you jump a big buck out of an area, you know, that's going to be probably his area where he's going to be the next season, you know, from my experience. But
hunting these pine thickets, when you find a trail, because I've done exactly what you're talking about before, you find that trail that's exiting that pine thicket, and you pop in there and just see what it looks like. And I've actually got a spot on the club from last year that I put a camera at for a little while. I don't think I ever picked that camera up. Oh, okay. I might have a little Easter egg out in the woods.
yeah, you probably got some good ones.
Oh, okay. All right. I know what I'm doing this weekend.
That's where Steve was probably spending all of his time.
Stop it. People know who. Well, I don't know. Have we done that outro yet?
Yeah, it came up last Thursday.
Okay, whatever. Anyways, man, he wants me to name my target buck Steve because my father-in-law's name's Steve.
Dad told him when he kills
That's
Steve,
wrong.
the deer, we'll have Steve, his father-in-law, coming on the podcast and sit in on it.
Oh man,
It's terrible. God, you just threw me way off.
that's wrong.
Okay.
It's a good joke.
So
I love Steve. Steve's a great guy.
I think that's him.
So we're gonna get back to the pine thicket thing. Man, you threw me way off.
Focus.
Okay. So that spot on the club, there's a nice trail coming out of a pine thicket where I'll slow roll down some of these roads or walk some of the closed roads and look for those trails crossing. And a lot of times, especially with a pine thicket, the edge is sometimes thicker than the interior. So you got the sunlight kind of penetrating on the edge, and for that first 10 or 15 yards, it's really, really thick. And sometimes you got to get on your hands and knees and crawl through there. But when you get on the interior, sometimes it opens up. It's still really thick, especially at ground level, but you can kind of stand there and you can look around and you can see all these trails going in every direction. Are you going into those pine thickets and putting a camera in spots like that, or hunting spots that in the pine thicket?
I will go in there with my pruning shears and I will cut some briars. Oh yeah.
Okay, interesting. So, because pretty much what you described is what I found where I put a camera on the club last year. Was you get up in there and it's a little bitty ridge point, and there's trails crisscrossing the entire thing. There's droppings all over the place, and if you sit on the ground, it's like there's clumps of briars all over the place. Like you can kind of walk between them on the deer trails, but there's like clumps of briars all over the place. And if you were just standing up, you could shoot probably like 25 yards with a bow through there. Is that a spot that fires you up?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I would bring me a stool and I'd cut me out an area with my pruning shears. Definitely don't wear your ghillie suit in there because it's going to be like Velcro walking through it. But cut you out a little area, put you a stool in there. Yeah, something, you know, up against some good back cover. You'll be good.
Okay.
That would definitely be an area I'd hunt.
Okay, interesting.
Especially a lot of droppings. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of drop-ins, and actually, if you go up the ridge point and you follow it up to where it kind of cuts up into a draw, I went up into that draw, and it's like there's all those backers hedges up in there, and it's like bed. I mean, all up in there, beds, you know, within 50 to 100 yards of this little ridge point where all the trails kind of cross. So, yeah, okay, interesting.
I've noticed, like in Alabama, like a lot of these pine thickets I walk into are either these, you know, the switchgrass thickets from the cutovers.
Mm-hmm.
It'll just be hundreds of acres of switchgrass. You can walk out in it, and there will be hundreds of trails and hundreds of beds. Narrowing down a buck bed would be impossible, in an area like that. But if you could get in it, like an area like that, like closer to the middle, with a bunch of sign around it, especially a bunch of droppings. I don't know about like the switchgrass. Of course, you're not going to find any rubs. You're going to find a ton of droppings, though, maybe some big tracks. But if you could get like in a area in the middle of that's got a, like 10 or 8 trails coming off of it, you could probably, intercept a buck or something, especially during the rut. That would probably be a really good area.
Yeah, and it's kind of difficult because it's almost like there's so many trails and so many beds, like what you're talking about. It's almost kind of directionless. Like they're coming from everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And they're going to everywhere. And they're just crisscrossing through there. So how is it that you narrow down a specific spot in a pine thicket? Is it just a place where you can see decent enough to shoot?
I'll go in and kind of grid hunt it. Like, put on a map. I'm going to hunt this little section. And, I'll maybe hunt it like 1 or 2 times. I don't see any kind of movement. I'll move to the next grid. Then I'll hunt the next grid. Then I'll grid search it, grid hunt it down until I jump a buck. I'm going to hunt it. If I feel like there's a big buck in there, I'm going to stay on it.
Do you have any success, because I'm thinking of a personal spot, where it's like 8 to 12, 15-year-old pines. They haven't been thinned yet. And they killed out some of that understory. It's some of that, you call it switchgrass or like that Brigham sedge, and some briars underneath it. But like the trees are barely big enough. Like you could put a lock on about 5 foot up, but there's so many limbs. Like I tried it. It's terrible. If you sit on the ground, you're kind of exposed. Like there's some cover, but it's kind of, it's like you could shoot maybe 50 yards in these woods, but there's like patches. Like you'll get into like certain sections, there might be like a 1/4 acre section that's like a little bit more open, less grass and briars, and then if you go literally 60 yards, it's like a wall, and it's like it kind of flip-flops like that, but you have all these intersecting trails, a lot of rubs, because there's big enough trees in there that they're rubbing, they're wearing out scrapes. Have you ever hunted and had much success in those kind of areas?
Oh yeah, ton of droppings.
Yeah.
Okay,
I've got one, and I want to walk you through a situation, and I want you to get a thought process on this. There's one of those spots like that I've hunted. I hunted maybe one time last year. I probably should have hunted more. I keep saying I'm going to kill a buck in there, and I keep talking myself out of it. I've always found big scrapes and rubs in this one spot, just like what we're talking about, that age range of pines. And I found probably 3 years ago, I found a really big scrape. I was walking out on one of these points. I found a really big scrape there, and it was destroyed. This little water oak sapling that's probably, 2 inches in diameter, 8 foot tall. They had a huge scrape underneath it. I'd walked up, following some deer trails, following rubs to it. And when I got to it, there was trails going every direction. There was a thick drainage, kind of the head of an SMZ next to it. That was this dog hair thick, as Andrew would say, lots of briars. And I got to it, and I saw there was one licking branch. So I went to break off another branch to give them another licking branch to kick it out. The second I did it, it was a real calm morning, probably 8 o'clock in the morning. Thermals were rising straight up, no wind. You breathe. It was real cold. You just see your breath go straight up. I do that, and I hear this commotion, and I look to the left, and there's a buck running right at me, coming up that drainage. Like he must have been bedded or standing somewhere down there in that real thick stuff. And all I see is deer legs coming to me as this deer is running right to me as I'm making this commotion, trying to snap some branches. And I drop to a knee, trying to knock an arrow. And of course, he stops about 20, 25 yards. I can see his brisket and down. And then when he finally saw me, didn't smell me, he saw me kind of sitting there. He turned and ran off. I caught part of a main beam as he was running off. But I try to hunt that spot. There was one pine tree I could get a lock on in about. Again, like you couldn't saddle hunt. There's too many branches. So I had one little lock on, 5 foot up a tree. Like literally it was like, at my nose on this tree is where it was, like one stick and get up in the tree. Hunt it one time, didn't see any deer. A spot like that, it's still an area I'd love to go back in there and hunt. And it's legal distance off the road, everybody, but it's not far off the road. How do you hunt something like that? Because like as you go through, there's like you're almost like as you're following the deer trail, it's like not a tunnel, but it's like a area where they've eaten back a lot of that browse. but like on either side of you, it's thick, but there's trails coming out from every direction.
Oh, yeah.
Like in a situation like that, how would you go about, like you find something like that, the signs there, the bucks are using it. How do you try to pinpoint how you should set up and also access something like that?
Now, the access, that's going to be dependent, on the area. That would definitely be an area that I would hunt. And that kind of sounds like the same area that I was hunting when I shot my other pine thicket buck, I guess you would say. Those type pine areas like that, I like to get down lower. It seems to me like, too, when you get down like to lower, ground level, you can see further in those. Is that the areas that you're talking about? Yeah. I don't see how you could, you're getting 5 foot up in that tree. Is it not going to be like too, you're not really going to be able to get a good shot? Or how thick is it when you get up there and 5 foot up in that
There's
tree?
a lot of limbs, but there was enough of opening because I was trying to shoot to that scrape and where all the trails came, because there's like 5 trails that came to that scrape from different directions. That's what I was trying to shoot, and also my back trail that I came in on, which is another real big deer trail. But yeah, like you said on the ground and kind of got brushed in, you'd be able to shoot further underneath some of that cover, like underneath those limbs, because those limbs, head high, they're kind of interwoven and like locked together. But every now and then you'd have like where trees had died and there'd be like a little open lane where like you didn't have to trim anything. It was open. You could shoot through, but on the ground you could shoot underneath it. And I mentioned to you on the phone call, I think it was yesterday, I still don't have a ton of confidence hunting on the ground. Okay. Like about the, deer coming in, busting me, whatever. Like I feel a lot more like I can get away with a lot more in the tree than I can on the ground. And that's something that's given me less confidence when I'm in those situations where I find a spot like that, which is kind of a point we ought to talk about. It's like building confidence hunting on the ground. But that's the reason why I never truly just sat on the ground. It was like, man, again, deer could come from any direction. Yeah, they came in from behind me. They're going to smell me, so I probably don't have to worry about that. But it was just like not having enough confidence sitting on the ground in that spot. That's why I try to get elevated.
I would imagine that. Didn't you say there's a drain through it? I'd imagine most of that buck movement probably coming through that drain, right?
So there's a drain there, and there's also to my right as I'm walking down this point, and I say it's a point. It's kind of like a ridge system. But on the left is a SMZ. It's real thick at the head of it, and there's a bunch of trails coming out of it, and there's some buck sign down below it. Transitions to some hardwoods, and on the right side, it's like a low, almost you call it like a little low swag that runs this ridge, and it's not like an SMZ. It's like a low drainage that slowly opens up, and they cut all the way across it, but goes all the way down to Big Creek system. And I scouted that last year when I did a little loop through there, and there was a bunch of sign right there in that low spot. And man, it's like you'd get in areas, and it would be crawling through thick, and then you'd open up and it'd be an area. Again, viewers can't really see this, but bigger, a little bit bigger in this room, it would open up where all those trails would come through, and it'd get really, really thick again. It's like you'd come through like these little opening patches. And I was like, man, it'd be cool to hunt one of these areas. And again, I kept looking. I'm like, man, I'd get skylit if I got up in one of these trees, but I don't feel confident enough to sit on the ground in this spot. It was like, that's where a lot of sign was actually coming. It looked like it was coming up that low drainage, and then everything was splitting up, going higher up in elevation on either side of that drainage.
Yeah. I mean, depending on the time of the day, I don't really know what it looks like there, but a lot of those areas like that, I like to set up like at the bottom of the drain, where I can see, shoot up or, and catch all the movement down toward the bottom. It depends which, how thick it looks at the bottom, how thick it looks at the top, that's going to be dependent. But I have had success hunting a lot of those drainages like you're talking about in the pine thickets. But it's usually at the bottom, though, and I'll catch the movement, cross-trailing that drain or moving up that drain, so. Before
we get into more setups and stuff like this, because we've got a ton of other questions, I do want to go through your equipment you use when you're ground hunting, because you brought some of your ghillies that you use, and I want to kind of show at least the viewers. Again, if you're listening on the audio version, go to YouTube, you will watch this. But how you use different pieces at different times of the year as the season changes. And maybe before you show them, can you walk us through your thought process of what color pattern or what type of ghillie suit or leaf suit you might use at different points of the season, and how you, again, rotate them out?
Yeah, early season, I want to go more a, lighter grains, darker grains, kind of stay away from the areas I hunt. There's going to be areas too, early season that's still going to be brown, But the vegetation that I like really honing in on, the pine thickets or something to that sort, I'm going some sort of green type pattern. When I get down to like later on in the season, I'm gonna get to like a darker, more like a sage grass type pattern. Then I have one that that I use for either or. I feel like that blends in pretty much for both. So.
Now, do you wear a full ghillie suit, top and bottom? Do you just do a top? Kind of what do you do?
Yeah, I sweat just profusely. So, man, I would never be able to wear the top. I mean, wear the bottom and the top. So I just wear the top. I feel like too, like when you're hunting, usually your legs are not going to be really the part that I don't think they're really going to pick up on. They're going to pick up on probably your arm movement or something to that sort. So. Especially if you're sitting at a base of the tree or sitting real low down on the chair, you don't really have to worry about your legs. As long as you have like kind of blending in, with the colors, nothing real light, not like a real light khaki color. I wouldn't wear anything like that. So.
Okay. And then I want to talk about, you mentioned stools and chairs and maybe sitting on the ground. What do you like to typically sit on in different situations? I mean,
usually, probably like a 2 foot, 3 foot chair. Now I will bring in my saddle platform and put it on a tree. So I usually have it with me in my backpack because that's a pretty good method too. I feel like putting your saddle platform on the tree and just sitting on it, so you can get real brushed up against the back of the tree, especially if it's a real big tree. Sometimes with the chairs, I'm real peculiar with it because I don't want the chair to like squeak or like mush down in the mud, make like some sort of racket, and or maybe fall over if I have to stand up. So I'm real peculiar about that. My preferably method would be my platform on the tree. So
even on like small, if you're like in an area with no big trees, like you'll put them like on a small pine tree or something like that.
Oh yeah, I mean it. Not no 3 or 4 inch tree, of course. That thing would be hanging to the ground. But yeah, on a situation like that, I'm gonna probably bring me like a little pop up chair in. So.
That's what I was gonna say. So if you're in a situation where, we're gonna talk a little bit more about the sign finding and some of the more specific setups that you like to set up on, like when you find what you're looking for. But if it's a situation where you don't have any trees to sit up against, that's when you're going to take some kind of stool or something like that to use. If you have to sit in like, whether it's against briar, some grass, brush, whatever it is, in order to kind of get to the height level you need to shoot, but also where you're not sitting too high up where you're, skylined or, the top of you's, really easily be seen.
I always pack in my backpack. I'll pack in a short chair. I got like a little pop-up turkey blind. And it's about like a little half circle turkey blind, and it's like a little like camo tarp. I'll pack that. I always pack a inflatable cushion where I can sit all the way on the ground. I'll pack my little fold out chair, and I'll pack my platform. So I always have an option for each one of them.
No matter what you come across.
No matter what I come across.
Okay.
I want to get more into the gear talk. Also, before we go deeper into it, I want you to show some of these ghillie suits that you have here and kind of talk us through each one. So you have them like down there next to you. Just walk us through like
early season to
late season and what they are.
This would be, I guess you would consider more of a early season. This is a Cry Precision Viper hood, and it's just like a half style. It doesn't cover, your belly and all that. It's kind of like the shoulders, and it's got the hood, but it's got the little grids where you can put brush, maybe like pine, or if you're in like a little pine stand or whatever. Also too, you can kind of, with these little grids, the night before, you can kind of, if you know what area you're going into and what the vegetation looks like, you can kind of take some of your material and just stuff it down in there or whatever. But it's a real good option because it's not really that hot. It's kind of got made out of some mesh material, And you can kind of use it for a hybrid too. If you just wanted to buy one, you could use this too for like late season or early season because it's got the grid on it. So I just have some of the material stuff down in it and the grid. But most of these they'll just come plain with a grid with a hood. And you'll be able to put your own material on it. You can go to like one of these, like Michael's, Hobby Lobby or whatever. They even got like the fake leaves, fake pine straw. You would be shocked. Anything you want to put in this to make it look real. But I try to go with natural vegetation. I wait to wherever I'm going, especially the pine too, because it's going to give you a little bit of the pine scent. So, that's a pretty good option. Late season, it's going to be something more like this pattern. And this would be more if I'm going to be hunting in a sagebrush area, like the switchgrass. This really blends in good with it.
And that's just a lighter kind of tan with a little bit of light green in there.
Yeah, this is a, just a store, like internet bought ghillie, nothing homemade or anything. They come super bushy. I kind of trimmed it down a little bit because if you don't, everything in the woods is going to stick to it. The downside to these like this, they're super noisy. You don't want to put it on if you're going in a real thick area that's going to have a lot of briars and a lot of leaves. You want to put this on after you get to your destination. When you're walking through the woods with this, you're going to sound like you're crunching around on a bag of potato chips.
Because you're just catching on everything?
Everything.
But it's like if you have to draw a bow, is it too loud to draw a bow with?
No. Now, when if you're just already in your area where you're wanting to get, wherever I'm going to sit up, I'm going to take my pruning shears and I'm going to cut any type branch, that I could brush up against. I could brush 4 foot against. I'm going to completely clear it of any kind of debris, especially the ground too. So I don't want to step on any kind of leaf or anything like that. So
okay.
Yeah, the downside to these is super noisy. So my go-to, I guess, would be the First Light, this leaf ghillie. It's kind of like I guess it would be like a hybrid, but I shot 3 deer with this season, so it's kind of like my good luck ghillie, I guess.
The good luck ghillie.
But I've worn this with the Viper hood. You can, the possibilities are limitless, with a ghillie. Man, I tell you what, any of these, in the certain environment, you get brushed down, especially in like a prone position. I mean, it'd be hard for a person to see you, even if they're looking for you.
Yeah, that pattern right there specifically, I was telling you earlier that when they first came out with that pattern, which that's the Spectre pattern from First Light, and they came out with another one too that was like a waterfowl camo, and it's very light, and I'm like, man, that would do so good in a pine thicket because it looks like that sage grass and stuff. And we were actually hunting with some of the people from First Light in Georgia 2 years ago, and they brought the Spectre down, and one of them actually had I can't remember the name of the waterfowl camo, but someone had a little bit of that waterfowl camo, and we had that, and we put them side by side in the pine thicket, and it's like, okay, no, the Spectre's it. I mean, it blends in so good in a pine thicket.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we don't know what the deer really see. We can go by what the scientific data is and all that, but every deer I've had this on this past season, every deer that's looked my direction, like maybe picked up on some sort of movement, it's like they looked through me. So
speak about that. I do want to bring this a random point that you brought up before we started recording, which is you've got a property, again, you hunt pretty much all public, but you got some property that you own in your house and everything you live on. And you said you had a feeder back there, and you've tested some of the stuff in and around the deer coming to that.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about like some of the testing you did about trying to figure out like what worked best in those scenarios when you had actually deer coming around you?
Yeah, you know what time they're going to come out there. Set up on a timer, and if you got a camera out there, you're going to know what time they're going to kind of be out there. Just walk out there. Kind of. I guess stalk your way up to, close as you can to the, feeder or whatever. Even if you spook them, they're going to come back. They're almost like your own pets. But I've tried different, camo patterns with that, and also with my dogs. I got 3 dogs, and a couple of them, were having a hard time seeing me. I had my ghillie suits on up in a tree. I was doing some tree cutting in her yard, and anyway, I decided to put one of my ghillies on, to see, how my dogs responded to me. They knew something was up there. They knew I was somewhere, but they were looking around, and they couldn't even they were looking, directly towards me and didn't even know it was me up there. They could smell me, of course, but they didn't know where I was at. So, I mean, that's a testament right there.
Yeah. No.
I before we move on, I've kind of got a question about these specifically. That Phantom leaf suit, which by the way, we'll put a link in the description for that one. It's less than $100. I have one, but I really want it in the Spectre now. I have it in a different pattern, but it does not come with a hood or anything like that.
I got the Spectre hood.
So you bought a hood to go with it. So that's what I was wanting to ask about is how crucial is the hood? Like, do you have to have
crucial?
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But I wear the Spectre hood with a scent. It's a scent lock carbon hood, because of most of your scent's gonna come out, out of your head, or somewhere like where your gloves are at. So I try to mitigate most of the. I know you're not gonna be able to mask all of it. You'll never be at a deer's nose, but I think the carbon under this really really helps too. Because you ain't. Maybe it's just a confidence thing,
Mm-hmm.
It don't matter how much you brush your teeth, whatever, I think the majority of the deer, when they come out, I think they smell your breath more than anything. That's just my personal opinion, because you got to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And you watch your breath when you're out here in the cold. I mean, your breath is like blowing. You can see it like blowing for like yards, so they're going to have to smell something. So I think the carbon hood, wearing this over it, is extremely effective, but it cuts down on your hearing a lot.
That's a really good point.
That's I can't stand wearing.
God, it
like
just
that.
drives me crazy. But even this, it's mesh,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like, I can't really hear that good anyway, so it really knocks down a lot too. What I'll have to usually do on this, I'll have to cut the eye area a little bit more, where I can pull my ear out of it, where I can be able to hear a little bit better. But even though it being mesh, but the mesh is huge. I mean, that makes a huge difference. You're not going to beat a deer's nose, so there's no sense of, worrying about it being like a solid, type material. You want it to be breathable, because if you're going to be walking around with it, you're probably going to be sweating. You're really going to start sweating when the big buck comes out. You know what I mean? So I want it to be, something that's kind of moisture wicking too, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like almost like a spandex type material too. But it's the best money I've ever spent. The First Light Phantom. And this one. Yeah.
So, really, I mean, we get down to it, the whole point of wearing like a leaf suit or a ghillie suit like that is just to break up. You're trying to break up that human outline, specifically of your upper body. And so I'm assuming that's why you have to have something on your head to break up your head, basically, because that's going to stick out to a deer, right? I mean, so it doesn't matter if it's the Phantom or if it's one of these other ghillie suits that you got. Like, you're always wearing a hood 100% of the hunt.
Oh yeah.
Or at least when you're sitting, maybe not when you're accessing, but
Yeah.
when you're actually hunting there, you're wearing it the whole time.
Yeah. 100%.
Okay.
So we've gone through the different ghillie / like your leaf suit or leaf jacket that you use in the headgear or the hood for it. I want to get back into, because we're, by the way, for the listeners and viewers, we're about to talk about calling and Todd's success calling and going over what he uses for, again, calling deer off the ground and how effective it is. But before we get to that,
we gotta hash out the gear first.
Well, hash out the gear. One thing I'm curious with when hunting on the ground. Well, let me say this: if you're hunting the tree, most guys are going to use some kind of bow hanger or hook system for hanging their gun, hanging their bow, whatever. When you're on the ground, I don't know if you use anything like that. I don't know if you hold your weapon the whole time. How do you go about managing your bow and your rifle when you're hunting on the ground?
Now, if I'm going to be hunting on the ground, It depends with a bow or a rifle. With a rifle, I don't like using a lot of rifle slings because to me they hold in a lot of scent. They stink. So I usually, a lot of them was going to rattle around or whatever. As long as I have something on my gun that's kind of got maybe like a gear tie, and I rig it up to where it's almost like a carabiner. I'll put like a little daisy chain hanger or something like that on the tree, but I'm not going to use a sling. But I want maybe some sort of hanger where I can hang the bow or the gun, to where I can just, not a lot of movement to be able to get it off the tree. So, yeah, I feel like that's pretty important too.
So, like, you like to have a tree something next to you if you have that opportunity to be able to put your bow or gun. Are you right-handed?
Right-handed, yeah.
So, do you like to just put it somewhere on your left-hand side right here close to you so you just easily grab it and then you're ready to roll?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Depending on the area, sometimes I'll be back behind the tree, and I have the big, the tree trunk and stuff in front of me, and I can hang it, right here where I can just grab it. It just depends on, the area and where I think I have to be, so I hadn't really found a stand or anything that works real good on the ground. So, a lot of times with a gun, I'll fix up some sort of shooting stick, and I'll fix it to where maybe use a gear tie or something and connect it to my gun to where my gun will prop up like a real tall tripod or real tall bipod. But, something like that, it'll work too. It just depends.
Now, do you have another question on gear? Because I was going to move off gear.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about the seats and how you actually are setting up with the ghillie suit and your seat. So you mentioned that you bring in several different options. Mm-hmm. I guess that's just dependent on how high you think you need to sit or how low you think you need to sit based on, I guess, shooting ability from the spot, but then also concealment. Am I on track there?
Mm-hmm. You're correct.
So when it comes to brushing yourself in, like let's just say that you're sitting in a pine thicket and you have to sit like real low, and you want to brush yourself in. Talk about the importance of like front cover versus back cover. Like what is your kind of philosophy or what are you doing to brush your blind in?
Well, that depends on the area too, but one thing I do want to find, I want to actually try to find an area too, whether it be the terrain. I like to set up somewhere too where it like mitigates a little bit of the wind. Like, say, if the wind's moving from my right to left, set up somewhere where there's kind of like an obstruction where the wind is not going to hit me, then go up to the direction of the deer, kind of like a little bit of a blockade. Yeah, on I guess pine thickets. I like to do some either bring my own pre-trimmed like limbs in. I'll put some in my backpack like right before I go into the woods or bring some with me. I'll brush it in, but a lot of times though my little pop-up blind, I'll always usually put that behind me if I can, depending on the situation. And that's going to pretty much kind of cover my, the back area where I don't really have to worry about finding a spot to brush up against. Because, in those pine thickets, some of them are so spread out, you can't really find a good spot, especially for the back cover. So that's where, like a little pop-up blind or something like that comes in handy, so.
Not like a enclosed pop-up blind, but like one of those like the
it's like a little half,
the little like wall blinds. Like
I've
got one like one of those little Newcomb blinds, and there's a bunch of like little stake blinds you can kind of put out and kind of use that behind you or in front of you based off how the situation lays out.
Yeah.
So you're putting it behind you. You said. Mm-hmm. Okay. So is that more important for you to break up your outline from behind than in front, like that back cover aspect?
I always feel like the deer, sometimes might sneak up behind you, and to me, that's why I mainly put it there. But I don't really worry about the back cover as much as I do the shadows, and that's kind of hard to kind of determine where you're going to be until you walk around in there and figure out where the sun's at. But I don't want that my shadow to be where if I draw back, on a deer, my shadow of my arm's gonna be like going across his face. You know what I'm talking about? To me, that's more important than being brushed in. Especially with a ghillie suit on. So I'm confident enough the way my ghillie suit looks that I'm not really gonna to have that much ground cover anyway. Now, if I'm not gonna be using my ghillie suit, I'm gonna worry about brushing myself in more. So.
Okay, I got you. That makes sense. And then also, when you're just sitting there hunting, I mean, you're having to be like super, super still. So, I mean, what is that like as well? Are you just having to scan with your eyes the whole time? And are you trying to like not turn your head? Because I'm assuming you have to be extremely focused the entire time.
I mean, yeah, it depends where you're at. Yeah, you can, some of those pine thickets, though, if the deer are walking through it and, you're sitting there, you can set yourself up, your body, to where you can just see see the legs coming through. You know what I mean? And if you see his legs come there, he's probably not going to see you either. You know what I mean? You can make a little bit of movement, that way. But yeah, it can be challenging at times. It just depends. The layout of the land. I try to use some sort of obstruction or whatever. Like I was saying. So, man, it's yeah, you're getting into a wormhole, I guess. What you say?
Oh yeah, rabbit hole, baby.
Yeah, rabbit hole.
Man, ground hunting. You can't be playing on your phone, Jacob.
Yeah, I know that'd be a struggle.
That old phone saves some deer's lives,
Saves
man.
some big deer's lives. Let me ask you, how we talked a lot about like the pine country, and I do want to talk some more about, but also we're hunting like swamps. What's the difference when you're down there, as in like a lot of the setups and like the scouting aspect and like the areas that you feel confident going into? Like, we haven't really touched on this for either kind of habitats, like more pine country versus swamps, but how much is like preseason scouting a factor versus like in-season scouting and finding where the hottest sign is before you set up? Like, what, like, is there some areas that you like you'll preseason scout, like I'm just going to come back in here and hunt it? Or is there some areas that you were trying to like scout your way back into till you find what you're looking for and then setting up?
Now I would if I had to, but I normally always, have that, spot already picked out. So I'm going to do some, preseason or postseason. If I get to my area too that I don't think that's hot at that time, it's kind of dried up, because you never know, you know what I mean, until you get back to that spot the next season. Even if you have pictures, in that area, it might just be moving through there a little bit. But yeah, the postseason and preseason for sure. That's going to play a big factor into it.
So you're not necessarily doing a bunch during in season. You're not necessarily just going out there, kind of working your way back into a section. I mean, you did mention that with like, kind of grid hunting a pine thicket, but a lot of times just because you're doing so much, especially postseason scouting, you're kind of finding a lot of this stuff way ahead of time.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, I'm just going to go into this spot. I already have at least a general idea of where I need to set up, how I need to set up in there. Maybe fine tune it once you get in there, get set up and ready to roll. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, that's right. But now I will, like, if I get to that area and I feel like, man, I'm not really seeing a lot of drop-ins, not really seeing a lot of tracks. I might kind of start moving closer to where I think the movement is. That's one of the big, huge advantages of being in a ghillie as well. So where you're able to just get up and move, at will, instead of having to come back off of a tree, making all kinds of racket, relocating. I think that's super, super huge with a ghillie.
Yeah, I can see that being a huge advantage. And also giving the flexibility, like say you start seeing some movement and maybe it's an area like I think of like maybe some of those swamps, and that's why I want to kind of get into the swamps. Like maybe you can see in some areas a little bit further than others, and those deer, like you start seeing a couple of deer or a buck chasing a doe 75 yards away and you can't get a shot whether you got a rifle in your hand or a bow, and you can kind of just when they move off you ease up and kind of work your way over there, set back up, kind of more in that position instead of having to drop out of a tree, go over there and get reset up, before a deer comes back through.
Yeah, your odds of getting busted is a whole lot greater too, so.
Now, also, so when you're hunting the swamps, what is the setup down there typically? Is like the environment of where you're finding a lot of sign? Because again, maybe we're taking pine thickets out of the equation. Maybe you find some pine thickets down there, but like, what's like the situation down there? I mean, is it just more hunting in and around the water specifically, and like, what does that typically look like, and where you're finding a lot of stuff?
Oh yeah, like little dry spots in the water. Usually it's ankle to knee deep water. The buck that I shot, I mean, he's coming out of probably knee deep water. So yeah.
And then is it you're sitting in one of those dry spots, or are you just trying to still find intersections of trails and sign out there in that kind of more swamp environment, and you're just setting up, again, kind of an intersection of where a lot of that sign's coming together?
Yeah, like I said, it's I do my postseason or preseason scouting. I'll find those same areas that I'm describing earlier, with a ton of rubs or whatever. But I kind of want to find like a hub with a ton of trails coming off of it, where I find my cluster of rubs. But usually where I find the cluster of rubs, like a ton of them that I'm looking for, there's usually always going to be trails everywhere. But that's the areas that I want to focus on.
Okay, cool. Now, I want to get to the calling aspect and how this plays a factor. Talk to us a little bit about the timing of the season. Like, if like the rut's a certain, week, 2 week time period of like when it's typically really good, how soon will you start hunting an area and start calling? And then what are you implementing calling wise? Like, most people think of calling as, rattling and grunting. Do you do a lot of that? Do you do anything else? Like, what's your thoughts there?
I think the early part of the rut or pre-rut, me personally, that's probably going to be the best times, for grunting, rattling, whatever. I do some light grunts. I use of course, the tree thrasher.
Yeah, here.
Yeah, grab that sucker.
I'll toss that to you.
I don't know if they can even hear
You can pull up to your microphone a little bit.
Oh yeah, there you go.
So how do you...
Kind of sounds like a deer walking.
That's what you're using it for. You sound like a deer walking.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Or maybe like, you can, manipulate it where it sounds like a deer like pawing at the ground, making a scrape.
You kill some turkeys with that thing. I'm sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like
scratch.
it's pretty effective. I think like making the pawing noise, like making a scrape, or like the walking sound, to me it's more effective than making a grunt, So plus too, you don't really have to, it don't have to be like pre-rut, during the rut. I mean, it just sounds like a deer moving, if you do it right. When you hear a deer making a scrape, I mean, I've heard it a million times in the woods.
That real big deer I was talking about earlier, that popped out, where like there was no way you could ever shoot that deer. When I saw his rack, he came out of a thicket, came out of a real thick clear cut, came down. We heard him walk, get up out of the bed. He was better. It sounded like he was better right on the edge of the clear cut. He's 80, 90 yards from us. Super calm day, and I hear him get down. All that noise stops, and you just start hearing him pawing out a scrape. And he probably did that for 3, 4, 5 minutes. Stopped, pawed it out some more, stopped. And then, 10 minutes later, we hear him walk, and he comes right down there below us and just couldn't get a shot at him. So, I mean, yeah, you're 100% right. So, again, that's something you kind of implement. Do you implement that, again, while you're grunting or anything like that? Or, again, kind of walk us through, like, the thought process of the actual calling and when you're going to call, timing, how often, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, if I feel like using this, or making a scraping sound, or like a leaves, like a deer walking on the leaves, you hear that more than you do a lot of grunting in the woods, which I do. So I feel like a deer, sometimes they know somebody's sitting out there blowing a grunt, like they're blowing a horn or something. The deer, they're not stupid, they know. But it's going to be hard for a deer to know if it's a deer, predator, or whatever when you're making the ground scraping sounds. They know what that sounds like. I mean, that's that it can only be like one sound. It ain't going to be having a focus on sounding like a deer grunting. You know what it sounds like when a deer's pawing at the leaves. So something like this is going to be pretty effective. The walking, the stomping on the ground. I feel like that's a pretty good calling technique too. Along with the raking of the leaves, breaking branches. To me personally, that doesn't spook the deer as much as a grunt call. I use a grunt call some too, but I don't use it as much as I use something like this.
Can you walk us through a hunt where you killed a buck or had an encounter with a buck based off like calling on the ground, and kind of like walk us through the scenario of what did you actually do, how the setups lay out, and then what happened when the buck came in?
You talking about using the
or any calling?
technique?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of put me on the spot there. I don't like giving away my secrets. Say I guess the 10 point right here. I was just sitting there like kind of, it was getting closer to dark, and it's almost like one of those Hail Marys. You're like, I'm fixing to just start grunting. If it happens, it happens. And I decided, I did like a little small buck grunt. I don't do them really, really loud. I'm talking like very, very quiet. And I don't do real long, drawn out grunts. I do like the more of the popping. And so I'll do like a sequence, and then I'll do like the walking. Then like a few seconds, I might, make it sound like it's kind of like pawing the leaves, and then do like another little grunt. So I did that same sequence. Here comes that big 10-pointer, like I said, out of my right. I caught him out of my peripheral, coming out of the right side. Came right in. He made a scrape right in front of me, probably 20 some odd yards. But I believe it was this that brought him in. It kind of, I was in his area. Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
he came in and was kind of posturing a little bit, trying to figure out what other buck was in the area.
Kind of lost my focus there.
No, it's just fine. Well, that's
a lot like the buck that Pike killed that we were talking about earlier.
100%.
Because he went in and he was hunting a spot where he kind of knew this buck was bedding really close to him in this pine thicket, and he actually got 2 sticks. And I remember because we did an episode on it. What was that episode called?
Something subtle calling.
Yeah, it was like, oh man, it was something. Well, anyways, he had these 2 sticks, and he was kind of like hitting the audio viewers can't see this, but he's like smacking in the leaves with these 2 sticks like they're 2 drumsticks, and he's like trying to make it sound like deer walking.
I'm telling you, it works. Yeah.
It makes so much sense because they hear that all the time, and no one else is out there doing it, but it's like a very natural sound, And we've even talked about too in the past when you're trying to access a spot where you got to get right on top of some deer and you just can't help but be loud, like the leaves are too loud. Like yelping like a turkey, like puts them at ease.
Yeah,
like they hear that and they're like, oh, if the turkeys are good, we're good. Or they hear you walking and they think that you're a turkey, or they hear you walking and they think that you're another deer. If you do the whole heel to toe thing and try to sound like a 4-legged critter, it's just a really natural sound that I think it like puts them at ease, and it maybe even piques their curiosity, and it kind of makes them want to come check you out a little bit.
Yeah, if you sit there in the woods, it makes sense. So you hear all kinds of leaves, crunching, like walking around, squirrels, you name it, but you just don't hear. Me personally, you just don't hear the deer walking around grunting like some people will be sitting out there meh, 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 all day long. It's going to work at some point. The deer's going to get curious and come in, but I feel like I've had it work for me. I can hear movement over in a thicket, and I pull out my little call. Or before I had this, get leaves, or just stomp my feet on the ground, make it sound like a deer or something walking. Paw the ground up a little bit. It's going to sound more natural. Personally to me, than it would to a deer. Than pulling out your grunt tube grunting, especially the wrong time. You grunt at the wrong time, you're liable to blow out everything in the woods. I just don't think that that they're dumb like some people think they are, that it's just going to call them in, But I think something like this, or if you don't have this, doing the sticks or whatever, something like that's going to be more natural, and I think it's going to be arouse their curiosity more, because you can sound like a deer with this. The deer, you might grunt thinking it sounds like a deer, but it doesn't sound like a deer, it doesn't sound like a deer to another like mature buck,
Mm.
and you spook it off. But, every single one of, making noise with the leaves or something, that's going to be natural deer movement, and it's going to be easy to kind of simulate that than it will be with a deer grunt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about more aggressive kinds of calling, like a snort wheeze or rattling? Do you do any of that?
Yeah, I have, but I mainly I would rather kind of maybe like if I'm up against like some sort of brush or like a little bushy tree, I would more like rather shake the tree. I've had more success seeing deer like kind of shaking the tree than I have doing any kind of rattling. So
Didn't Thomas do that last year?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was like, what are you trying to? I don't read lips very well.
I don't either. I don't know why I do that.
Yeah. So my brother, he killed a deer on a piece of public last year, and he was grunting. It was coming in. It got hung up at like 60 yards in some real thick stuff. He was elevated in a tree stand, and there was a little creek drainage ditch between him and the deer, and he grunted, and the deer just kind of stood there. So he ended up snort wheezing at it, and then grabbed a limb that was on the tree next to him and just started thrashing that thing. And he's like, I knew as thick as it was between me and him. I mean, he was coming through a wall of vegetation because I went in there and helped him get this deer out, and it was terrible. And he just started thrashing this tree, grabbing this tree limb and just started thrashing this oak limb. And that's what got that deer to broke, ears pinned back, hair up, came walking in, and he shot it like at 20 yards with a rifle. Yeah, that's something interesting. It's one of those things that, like, if you can implement that, I can see how, especially hunting on the ground or if you're in a tree, as long as the deer can't see you, it could be super effective. Again, especially if you're trying to imitate like a buck working a scrape, pawing, or if he's making a rub. Again, just give him that action could be super helpful. I'm trying to think if I personally have done that. Had success.
I've never done it. I feel like that's something that it has to be at the right time. Like that buck has to be like in the mood basically for that to work, right?
Or if he's just in the area, maybe he gets curious. I look at a lot of calling. It's more curiosity than anything. Like it's not necessarily like he's going to come in there and fight, but he's like, well, it sounds like there's a bug. Oh, I'm going to go see what he's doing, kind of what's going on, and so on. So,
well, that's kind of how that we were talking about my 8-point back here. That's the first deer I ever rattled in. When I rattled him in, he didn't come in immediately. He came in like probably 10 or 15 minutes after I got done rattling, and he came in with his head down, and he was like sneaking and looking real hard. And I was kind of overlooking this bowl, and he came in behind me. And when I saw him, he was like looking down in the bowl, like looking around down in there, and that's when I was able to shoot him. But like he didn't come crashing in or anything like that. I mean, I heard like a twig snap behind me, and he had snuck in. He was already like right there by the time I saw him.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was like, I guess it's more that curiosity factor.
See, when I shot that 10, like when I did that sequence with the walking, and then I did the paw on the ground with this, I was actually like I said too, I was kind of set up where my feet were like in a creek. I had my rubber boots on. I was kind of set up, brushed up against, and like I said, my feet were hanging down in the creek, and I kind of made like a little bit of a sloshing sound too. And he came from, down a creek and crossed the creek and came over, like I said, in front of me. He started making a scrape. See, I think that he thought there were multiple scrapes in there, so they, I was thinking probably, maybe, he was thinking, it was another buck in the area, and he was just wanting to come over there and make his own scrape after he heard that buck making a scrape. So, and showing his dominance. But I didn't get the chance to even, use my grunt tube. He kind of came out so quick. He might have been, over there bedded down the whole time, and I just didn't know it. But he came out pretty quick. Like I said, I didn't even have a chance to even. I was going to grunt, but I didn't have a chance to even grunt. Just the walking around and the leaves, the leaves pawing, maybe me sloshing around in the, creek, making it kind of sound like a deer was crossing the creek. I think that kind of, brought him in a little bit more. But like I said, though, to me, that's just a more natural sound to them, and it's not as, I guess, invasive, I would guess.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's one of those things that, everybody kind of does whatever they do based off the confidence level they have. Like I have a lot of confidence grunting. I'm starting to gain more confidence rattling. I killed my first buck in Alabama, or first buck ever rattled in. I killed in Alabama last year, late October, and he came in like within a minute and a half, 2 minutes after done rattling, came right off the point, came down, thrashed a tree in front of me, made a scrape, and shot him at 25 yards. And then the second deer I killed last year, which I mentioned this a couple other times the last few episodes, I grunted him into like 7 or 8 yards to the tree, came through a pine thicket. Wasn't expecting a deer to come out right there. Had a trail right there, shot him, dropped him, went in the next day, was at the same tree, same calling sequence, grunting sequence, again, that tending grunt. And had another buck come the same trail that I shot him on. There's still blood right there where I shot him at because I dropped him. Came down. He stopped about 5 yards into the pine thicket. And all I could see was his brisket, his legs. Couldn't tell. We have a lot of antler point restrictions. Didn't know what the deer looked like. I just tell his neckline came all the way down to his brisket. And didn't want to shoot him without knowing what it was. He ended up turning and walking off before I could get a shot opportunity. And he came through a pine thicket. You probably could hunt on the ground in there. It would be terrible. I mean, it's one of those pine thickets that's maybe you can find a little bit of opening, a lot of briars, a lot of like just understory in there. But, they were cruising in it. It was an area that I knew there's a bunch of does in. I've seen a bunch of does in this area. And, went in there, probably the really late pre-rut, super early rut in this area where you might start seeing a couple bucks chasing does. And was thinking, man, there's probably going to be a mature buck cruising through where all these does are at, and there were. So that it's one of those things that I think the calling aspect is just figuring out what you can do that you feel confident in, but also if you can make those ground noises, again, the like walking sounds either with like that tree thrasher, that's what it's called, right?
Mm-hmm. Tree thrasher.
Or if you're actually on the ground, you can actually grab some leaves and actually paw out some spots, to sound like a deer. There's been other times, like I mentioned, like when I was popping that branch when I had that buck run in on me, I just kicked out the scrape, was breaking that branch off and everything, not breaking up, but bending it down, popping it. That deer came in there super hot and heavy, like trying to figure out who was on his scrape. And, it's stuff like that I feel like it can just make you more well-rounded in a situation when you need to try to sound as natural as possible, but also invoke that curiosity to a buck that, if he hears that, it's something he's used to hearing all the time, and it's going to get him on his feet to come over there and check out what's going on.
Oh, yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. Now, I grunt too. I use that calling technique, pretty good bit too. But I do feel like the walking sound, the breaking the brush, pawing the ground. I feel like that is more effective. I mean, I've seen it, for myself, so it might not be for everyone, but especially, that something like that will work real well, like in a pine thicket where you don't really have a lot of leaves you can crunch up, or a lot of bark you can crush or anything like that. But like I said, I'll call too, but this tree thrasher, it's pretty effective.
Now, what about decoying? Because you mentioned earlier before we started that you'll do a little bit of decoy action. So how does that factor in?
Yeah, I got a 3D target. I'll take the head off the 3D target, and of course take the antlers off of it. Put it in my backpack because I don't want to get shot going through the woods. And I'll set it up on like a T-post. I'll have it strapped to like a T-post, and I'll set it like in a thicket. Depending on, like I said, the area and the wind. And I'll put out some deer scent too. And, I'll use one of those too, and do some grunt calls, or it's got to be the right time of the year too. And I've had deer come out, at least be curious about it. I've had humans come out too. So, yeah.
So are you putting that in a thicket as like a visual distraction almost, where you're trying to draw attention away from you just so you can get a shot at that deer, position however you need to? Or are you putting it in a more open area where they're going to see it from a ways off, and then it's going to draw them into where you can get a shot at them?
I want to put it more in like an open area, I guess, but it's going to have to be where, like a real thick open area, like the sage grass, where the deer, if it's coming in, they can't see its body, because it's nothing but a head sticking up. That way I can if I want to like get a visual, I'll do some grunts and put the decoy out. And I want to be able to see a little bit of a distance. That's going to be more of like a gun hunting technique.
Okay.
So
that makes sense. That's not something I've tried at all ever is decoying.
Yeah.
But we're going to Kansas.
We're going to Kansas. That's why I'm trying to think about some of the stuff that we can use in Kansas.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%.
I mean, instead of carrying like a ginormous decoy out there, all you got to do is just get the head off of it. You can even put it like on the shooting stick or whatever. You can cut a branch off of a tree and stick it up on it. I'm sure you could probably get the head and just prop it up somewhere, if you found like a little bush or something. But it's, you got to think to a deer, especially from a distance away, if you start doing some grunting or something, it'll at least get a deer, maybe possibly get it out of a thick area where you can get eyes on it,
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I had in mind for Kansas.
Because, you grunt, sometimes, and, if a deer starts looking, he doesn't see another deer, he, starts getting like a little bit suspicious, So if you start grunting, doing your grunting sequence and stuff, and you got he spots a little bit of a deer sticking out there, rack or anything, he's going to think, yeah, that's another deer over there.
After doing this for about 5 or 6 years now and having success and getting killing bucks, specifically using the ghillie and hunting off the ground, what has been some of your biggest takeaways up to this point on things that you've learned maybe more about what mature bucks like to use, like areas, habitat, and how like this can be a lot more effective if, for like a guy like yourself to be able to get into like where they're super comfortable at?
I think deer, they've been so pressured over the years. I think a lot of the deer now, especially big bucks, associate big trees with hunters or big trees with danger. They might not know it's a hunter hunting them, but they think, big trees, danger. They associate it. So they're kind of moving into these areas where there's less and less trees. So there's, you're not going to be able to get in those areas unless you maybe get in there, with or without a ghillie suit. You're going to have to sneak in there on them. And, your best option is going to be with a ghillie, getting in an area like that. So I think it's the aspect of, the deer associating trees or big trees, with danger. So, I think that's where a ghillie can be really, really effective.
What would be a piece of advice you'd give to, whether it's us, because again, we're going to try to do this specifically to go to Kansas, but, maybe other listeners that are, listening or watching this podcast that maybe just don't feel comfortable in a tree stand, or they want to be a little more diverse on their hunting options and maybe want to try something like this, whether it's on their hunting club, piece of public land, whatever it is. What would be some advice you'd give to those individuals if they want to get into this, things they should know about, things they pay attention to in order to try to go out there and try to have some success doing this?
Man, you're really going to just have to get out there and try it. I mean, if you're not killing deer, if you're just one of those hunters, you don't kill a deer early season, what does it hurt for you going out there to at least try it to see how deer respond to it? You're going to have to get in one and walk around out in the woods with it to get comfortable, to feel what it's going to feel like walking through brush with it, or kind of, blending yourself into the vegetation, cutting branches, putting them in your ghillie, brushing yourself in. You're going to have to, maybe sometimes burn some hunts, to try it out, but only way you're going to be able to do it, you're going to have to get out there and do it. You're just going to have to get out there and try it. But guaranteed, if you just keep trying it and you finally get it down, man, you'll be amazed how close you can get to deer. And man, once you do it and you start getting real close to deer, man, your confidence level, man, it get all at all-time high. And there is nothing like it though, being 10, 20 yards from a mature buck. It's just awesome. So once you have that half a man, you'll be hooked.
Yeah, especially eye level.
Oh yeah,
That's the thing.
or even a small buck. I mean, I hunted with my buddy, Josh Burnett. We've hunted, both been in ghillie suits, and we've been 10 yards from bucks. We were sitting on the ground, brushed in, actually with that same little ground blind I was telling you about. We actually had a mature buck come out on us, almost ran us over, but it was so dark I couldn't get a sight picture through my peep sight, so I had let my bow back down. And man, it was just having that experience. Even though I didn't shoot that buck, man, it was still awesome. I mean, if you can be with a buddy and do it, and man, you get to thinking, man, like, this is awesome. This is the way to go. If you can be, two people doing it, you dang sure can get away with it yourself.
And you mentioned earlier you take your wife with you.
She goes with me a lot.
She'll wear the ghillie too?
suit. Yep.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I need to talk Tiff into that.
I'm sure she'll be.
She
all
loves
about
it. I mean, she loves it. She's been amazed too how close we could get to deer walking in, just being in it. We've had deer smaller, not no big, huge mature bucks, but smaller bucks literally walk up on us, and I'm having to put my hand back here on her leg, like, don't move. I'm talking like close, like. So, where I'm like, man, we're going to have to run this buck off or we can get to where we're going.
Yeah. One thing we never mentioned, because we talked a lot about like kind of that pre-rut time frame for you, but do you implement this as well, like early season during bow season? Like, do you focus on any kind of feed trees or anything like that with a ghillie? Or like, what does your early season strategy look like compared to like during the rut? I
don't hunt any kind of feed tree unless I find a specialty tree. It's going to have to be like a honey locust or something like that. To me, it's just so hard. There's so many like acorn trees in the woods. It's hard to narrow them down. A lot of places I go, if I want to find a feed tree, it's going to have to be in a thicket. And my personal opinion, they're going to feed more on the greenbrier. I would think. Especially the places that I hunt, more of the viney type vegetation inside the thickets. So I'm still going to use my same style.
And that's one benefit, I guess, getting comfortable going to those thicker areas, like something, again, talking pine thickets here, and hunting in there, is you are surrounded by food.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's bedding and food, and it's all of it.
It's just where they live,
So
man.
it's like, I'm sure it's one of those places that even early season, you probably could have movement in there all day long of just deer getting up and browsing around, moving through there. Compared to if you're like hunting an SMZ or, like just somewhere outside that thicker cover where there's very specific times you would see deer there versus like being in that cover where it's all food all around you. I mean, they could be in there moving around all day long, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. That's another advantage too with it. You're up in a tree and you start hearing the movement in a certain area, it's very hard for you to get yourself, where I'm going to get back down and relocate and move to another tree. You know how tough that is. Mm-hmm. I've done it a million times. It's not fun. And then you're worried about, did I do the right thing? Did I mess up my day? If you're in a ghillie and you're already on the ground, all you got to do is just, stand up and walk to another area, and it's just, man, you just have so many more options, I believe. For one, you got to tote around all the weight. I still have a bad habit of doing it. I'll still tote around all my gear all day long, knowing I'm going to end up hunting my ghillie suit. I just do that sometimes, just for the option if I have to get in a tree. But usually, like last year before that, they were all on the ground with ghillie suit. But and a lot of it too is me being able to get up and move closer to where the deer is moving. Because a lot of times you set up in those spots, it just might not be the right time for that deer, and you start running out of daylight or whatever. You got to make a move. You want to get closer and closer and closer to them. But that's something that I do a lot. I'll pick up and I'll start moving. I'll start moving. And I'll sit or stand, kneel down for a few minutes, and I'll listen. I don't hear anything. I'll get up and move again, listen, because you're going to hear, if it's a buck in there, a deer in there, at some point you're going to hear them.
I've got a spot now I thought about, Andrew. Remember, I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago. That spot that I felt like I was going in, I'm trying to think how I described it. I was going to run more cameras in there where I found a bunch of sign in a creek system that was surrounded by 2 clear cuts. It's an area, it's a SMZ system that comes up through this creek, got 2 big clear cuts on either side. And there was so much buck sign in there, like kind of what you're talking about, big rubs all over the place and scrapes that I had not seen. It was like a month earlier than where I've typically seen sign there. Like this was like in mid-October, like around, it was opening day of bow season, and there were scrapes and rubs everywhere. And this place does not rut until like much later in the season.
Yeah.
And typically I didn't found something like that until like November. And I hunted one time. This is my biggest thing. I hunted one time and like never went back. Got in there late. Ended up, I didn't get up a tree because I had deer already like as I'm walking up the SMZ at Gray, like there's deer popping out of the clear cut down in there, and it was couldn't get a shot with them at my bow at a doe with my bow, and they busted out. So I sat on the ground. But it's one of those areas, if you get elevated, like the SMZ is open. Like there's like very little cover. It's a bunch of big oaks and some hickories. But there's saplings in there that make that canopy like 8 foot high. Mm-hmm. And if you get up in a tree, you can't see through it. Like you can't shoot into it. But if you get on the ground, especially there's a creek, and that's what I did. I kind of sat my boots kind of in the water up against the embankment where all this grass and brush was up against this other big tree. And I could shoot out across this little SMZ. And that's kind of now, after like what you're talking about, that's probably one of those areas I'd probably would want to try some of that, especially like early season if those bucks are doing that again. I need to run a trail camera in there. But is the setup maybe something like that? Because they're just popping out of these clear cuts, coming down there and feeding and laying down all the sign, and kind of going back up and crossing.
Yeah.
And again, if you got up in a tree, I just don't know if you'd be able to see them all that well.
Yeah, my problem too with early season with bow hunting and stuff, you get up in a tree sometimes and you'll get up there and they'll you think it's going you got a little shot here and you got a shot there, but man, there'll be tree limbs everywhere. Once you get up in the tree, you're like, oh god, I can't get back down and cut this limb, or I'm gonna have to move. I can't really see, I can't really get a shot. But if you get out of that tree and get down, it seems to be, especially early season, you can get a whole lot better shot opportunities on the ground. And that's just my personal opinion.
Well, and especially because this is a pretty tight SMZ, so it's not like a big, wide open. Like, even when you're on the ground, if you look, like, you could shoot probably, like, if you had a rifle, you could shoot probably 50 yards maybe. Mm-hmm. But, like, you can't see 150, 200 yards through this bottom because there's enough cover down in there. But it's just, when you sit on the ground, it seems like you'd have better shot opportunities. And that's something I might try to implement in that area specifically. Because, again, the cover on the edges of it sets up really good. Like, I'm not going – that clear cut, the way it's managed, like, I'm just going to tell you, you're not going to hunt in the middle of it.
Oh, yeah.
That's all I can say. Like, you're not going to unless you have that bush hog and you're going to open up an area.
Yeah.
That's about the only way you're going to be able to kill something in that sucker, at least early season. But hunting around the edges of it where they're coming in and out, dropping out of it, and they're bedding. It seems like the deer are always bedding because you'll jump deer out if you're walking that area, especially midday, and they're like 30 yards off the edge of that clear cut. Mm-hmm. Like, they're not way off in the middle of it. They're all around the edges of it because they're feeding in that cut, but they're also getting down here because all the oaks are dropping. They're trying to feed on some of those trees. Yeah. So, interesting. Okay.
Well, just think, though, how much, more quieter you can be getting in, getting out, or just, like, leaving. I've heard some of the podcasts about how long it takes you to get out of the woods.
Yeah.
Man, hey, listen to me. I'm
gosh.
the same way. It takes me forever. Like Josh, my buddy.
Yeah.
Like, if we separate, he'll be at the vehicle waiting on me. He'll be like, "Man, what's taking you so long?" He knows. I'm super slow on my stuff. I want to take my time. Get out of there when I want to.
Mm-hmm.
I might stay an hour after dark. It depends if deer are moving, or whatever. But man, it's just like it takes a lot of burden off of you just being on the ground, being able to just go. If you got a backpack, you just throw your backpack on and go.
That's it being a huge advantage, like you're saying, like waiting even an hour for dark if there's deer coming through. Like, that's happened to me a couple times where I'm in the stand and deer coming out right at last light. I'm like, I don't want to bump them because I want to come back in here. And it's like you're just sitting there waiting on them to like leave. I had one hunt we've talked about before where I had a nice 3-year-old buck come down below me, 7-point. He's feeding around. I mean, I'm talking, you could have dropped a spear and killed this deer. I mean, he's just right there underneath me. And my buddies, they were hunting across the road from me, and I could see their headlights coming back to the road, get back to their truck. And I cranked the truck up and everything. That deer, when their headlamps were like coming over the hilltop, he looked over at them in that general direction. It was like just kind of keeping tabs on it. It's dark, but I can still see this deer, like see the outline of this deer here. I'm looking up through the binos at like 12 yards. And, they got to the truck, cranked the truck up. Second, the truck drove off. The deer just, went back to feeding. And finally, after like 30, 40 minutes, I'm like, I'm getting out of this tree. I'm not staying here any longer. Like, I'm tired. I'm hungry. Sorry, bud. Nothing else came back out. And I just started climbing down. He let me literally he was probably maybe 35, 40 yards from me. He let me get all the way to the ground and did not make a move until I stepped foot on the ground. And then he was like, okay, I'm out of here. And then he just took off running. But, the whole time I'm calming down, he's like, that's one freaking big raccoon coming out of that tree. That's all I'm sure he's thinking. But, yeah, that's such a good point.
He's like, man, has that thing been there the whole time?
But it would be really good, like, right after legal light to be able to, get out of there quick and just get out of the area in case a deer is going to come through there in the next 15 minutes. Because, again, it takes me a little bit of time to pack up my stuff in the tree, be real quiet, get down. And there's so many times by the time I get to the base of the tree, Andrew's back at the truck. And
I'm back at the house.
I'm packing stuff up, and that's when a deer starts popping up. I'm like, crap.
I can't hold on you. I'm the same way.
Dude, that's why, dude, if I don't have a deer in front of me, I cannot get out of the woods fast enough. Like, I put my running shoes on to get out of the woods.
Literally, sometimes my wife, she will panic. I will be in the woods so late getting out. But, a lot of times, though, I'm way back. And she's been with me, too. But being that slow, I'm the same way, and she'll panic sometimes. And I have to tell her now, like, if you don't hear from me by 9:30, something happened. But I give her that. I told her either 9 or 9:30. That's pretty late.
Yeah, especially
that's very late.
But I'm just saying, though, that's the emergency time. If you don't hear from me by then, something's wrong.
Because, we're in Alabama. It gets dark at 4:30 in December here. So, give you quite a buffer time there.
But just think, though, say, you get off work. You only got 30 minutes, an hour to hunt in the woods. Throw your ghillie on. What do you got to lose?
Yeah.
You dang sure ain't going to want to throw your stand on your back and go climbing up a tree for 15 minutes and have to come right back down,
No, and there's spots, especially like on Andrew's club, that it probably would work extremely well.
Yeah, there's spots on the club where I'm going to try it this year in early season just to try to kill some does. Again, because I just want experience, not only just shooting deer with a bow, like I've killed deer with a bow, but I want to get kind of tuned up before we go to Kansas and specifically hunting off the ground.
Yeah.
And so, I'm going to try it this year. And also, I love that we've been having this conversation because like we mentioned earlier, the ghillie suit is such a low cost item that someone can get that opens up a whole new world of things that you can go and hunt. It's not like buying a saddle setup where you're spending $400 or $500 or a climber where you're spending $300. It's that leafy suit right there is $90.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about less than $100, and it opens up like a whole new aspect of hunting where you can go and hunt these spots where it's where the deer live, man. Like they're in those pine thickets, know. So that excites me. I want to try it this year.
Yeah, I just think somebody that says, "Man, I can't afford to get a ghillie suit and stuff." Some of them are like super duper expensive. I'm like, why in the world would somebody pay that? For that ghillie suit. My buddy Josh, man, he made one. It's extremely nice. He took one of his old hunt jackets and got some stuff like at Michael's or somewhere like that. But he made military grade one. He watched a video on YouTube, somebody making them, but it looked really, really good. Super heavy, one of those that you'd be sweating to death in.
On a cold day,
it was a very, very good quality. Like you'd look at it and be like, man, where'd you buy that? So there's plenty of like tutorials on YouTube and stuff how to make them too.
Yeah, customize it to your specific spot.
You could just cut them out of just old clothes or whatever. I've done them just about out of anything. as long as it's not white. It don't have to be a specific color, If you're quiet enough and you're stealthy enough, you're still gonna have. It's not gonna be the end all be all, just the ghillie suit. You're still gonna have to be quiet, stalking around like you would be, even making your approach to your stand. You're still gonna have to be extremely quiet, but you're just mobile. I'm talking. You can just make a move in the split moment. If there's two bucks over there fighting, you're up in a tree and you can't see it. I've been in the woods before and seen, I've seen deer fighting and stuff, and been up in a tree and thinking, man, God, if I could get over there to one of them, just think, if I was on the ground, I'd be able to sneak over there on them. So,
and a great example when we're in Kansas, because Kansas, trying to focus on more like CRP cover and like those overgrown fields and like cedar thickets. You get some bucks fighting, locked up, whatever, or like you see a buck chasing doe 150 yards away. I mean, it's as easy as just getting up and moving, making a move versus trying to get out of the tree or call them to. It's like, well, just get in a better position and then reset up.
Oh yeah.
And that's where I feel that could be super, super helpful when we go do that. But also, again, try to apply here. There's some places in Alabama, Andrew, we've talked about trying to ground hunt. Some more like grassy areas.
Man, I'm telling you that just get this first light Phantom, man. I mean, it'd be like the best $100 you might not ever saddle hunt again and stuff. I mean, you will, of course, over. It depends on the area. I'm not going to use this everywhere I go, but it's going to be with me. I'm going to have it on when I go in the woods.
Yeah,
I always have it on with my backpack, geared up, going in the woods. And like I said, most of the time, though, that's what I end up, killing the deer off of. Man, just you do it one time, you kill a big buck or something, you're going to be like, man, this is awesome. You've shot does.
Yeah, I've shot does on the ground.
So.
And it's like I was telling you, I had one of the does I shot in Tennessee off the ground underneath a couple persimmon trees that were dropping. It was super, super thick all around this little woodlot I was hunting. I went to go try to look for that arrow, and I took 2 steps off that little cedar tree I was standing up against. I was just wearing camo, no face mask, nothing, just standing up against the cedar in the shadows. I see more legs coming, like what you were talking about, like coming through the brush. I'm like, oh, crap. And I see antlers. I'm like, oh, crap. So I'm like, do I knock an arrow here? Like, this is all happening in milliseconds. Like, knock an arrow, do I step back to the tree? And, like, I decided to knock an arrow while stepping back to the tree. And that buck caught me moving. He was a really nice deer. Caught me moving as I was like trying to come to full draw as I was stepping back. And I should have just, looking back, I should have just hit a knee. Because I was standing up. I should have just kneeled down, knocked an arrow, and probably would have had him because he was by the time he popped out where he could see me, he was sitting at 30 yards.
Now, too, like shooting with a bow. Now, even with a rifle, the real funky buck that I shot 2 seasons ago, I don't know if you remember, I was in a ghillie suit. Had like the real weird looking finger,
okay, yeah.
real tall one.
I know what deer you're talking about.
Yeah, I was laid prone out on the ground when I shot that buck. But that was, I waited. I already kind of had that deer's area honed down. I waited till it rained. You can be really, really effective with a ghillie, like stalking. When the ground's wet. I mean, it is super effective.
How'd that hunt play out? Like, why were you having to lay prone for that hunt?
Just the area where I was at. It was kind of like knee-high switchgrass. Mm-hmm. That's what I shot that buck out of. I was laid proned out in that with my sagebrush ghillie suit on. Yeah.
Dang.
I got low down as far as I could in that sage grass, and I made me like a little area I parted where I could get my rifle through it, and I had like 2 or 3 different options. I had my my rifle on a bipod, but I had like one little lane straight out for I was laid down literally in the grass, mm-hmm. and I had 2 like to the left and to the right, and I had one little lane in the front. And like I said, I was proned out on a bipod when I shot that buck.
Dude.
Laid in the grass. So.
That's legit. Got to do what you got to do. Right?
But it was kind of like, I guess I was kind of like on an incline. So, when he came up, got out of his little bed area, he was in that, God, what's that stuff called?
What kind of vegetation is it? What if you had to describe what it looked like? Privet.
No, it's that red stalky looking stuff. I'm trying to think.
Andrew.
Poke salad.
Yeah.
Poke salad.
Yep.
Pokeweed.
It was like in a big poke salad like top area. Like it was just a whole bunch of stalks and stuff. You could, when I found like his area and stuff. I mean, I walked out in it and a bunch of it was broke down. It had like beds all in it and stuff and like logs. Yeah.
Interesting. So, okay. How long did you?
I looked up too. After that, I kind of got like curious. Why do they like those areas like with the poke salad? It said that it's like a natural insect repellent, for deer. So.
Oh, interesting. They eat it too. I got some growing all up in my yard right now.
Yeah.
That,
they had all
hammering.
They had all this stuff just like pushed down where they were just laying all over it. Mm-hmm. So.
Interesting.
I thought it was kind of like, I was like, man, why are they in this? They're not eating it. They could have nipped on some of it, but it looked like they were laying in it more. But it said it was like a natural insect repellent. I thought it was pretty interesting for deer.
How long did you have to lay there before you got a shot at that deer?
I think I got out there maybe like 45 minutes before daylight. I lay there till like 8:15.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. That was pretty cool. Yeah, you're asking about doing this ground hunting thing in early season. All I could think about is you rolling up in there with the timber rattlesnakes, just rolling up in a brush pile with one of those bad boys.
Now laying prone. Now I'm the same way. I'm gonna worry about that too, and I'm not gonna do it just anywhere. I'm not gonna go lay out in the swamp, the prone area.
Oh, Mr. No Shoulders.
Yeah, those jokers will be up in the tree.
Cottonmouths, yeah.
Yeah. That's another thing too. When you need to practice, if you're gonna bow hunt with a ghillie, practice, at a kneeling position, practice sitting, however you're gonna set up, and you think you're gonna set up. It's very hard. It's gonna be hard sitting on your butt trying to draw a bow back and shoot. You know what I mean? It's gonna be really, really tough. But I usually try to sit like on probably a 2-foot stool, bow hunting. That's kind of like a little pop out chair. That's kind of like my preferred method. If I got to get on my knees and do it too, if I got, most of my, my bow, it's like 30 inches axle to axle. So I don't have to worry about it being, hitting the ground or anything, trying to draw back on it. I guess that depends on your body frame too. If you can get on your knees and shoot one.
Yeah. Well, Todd, we're sitting here at almost 2 hours.
Oh,
so
really?
Yeah. So we got to wrap this sucker up.
I've been bumbling around enough.
Dude, listen.
It takes me a little bit to get warmed up. See, I'm just now getting warmed up.
See, time flies when you're having fun, man.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we've missed or any kind of tip that you have in a nutshell if someone has listened to this podcast and they're all fired up about going out and trying to do the whole ground hunting thing? What would be your number one tip for them?
Do not be afraid to at least just, give it a try. You'll be surprised how close you can get to wildlife in general. Not necessarily a deer, anything, wildlife. I mean, you're going to have coyotes come up on you, foxes, squirrels. I mean, you name it. But just don't be afraid to try it, because that's the only way you're going to be able to figure out if it's even going to be something you're going to like. You know what I mean? Like I said, if you're not killing deer early season, what's it going to hurt? You know what I mean? If you're a person that normally doesn't kill a deer early season, and, it'd be an effective tool too for you to get out there in the woods and scout around, walk around, stalk around with it. I mean, it's, you're going to have to try it.
Yeah, I see that also talking about getting around, scouting around. It's not like when you carry a saddle or tree stand with you where you're like, I got to get in a tree. Because if you're taking the ghillie suit, you're not getting in a tree. So like there's no rush, there's no pressure. It's, keep walking until you find, the sign you're looking for, the concentration of, again, you're looking for rubs, maybe scrapes, all and around the thick cover, droppings, big tracks, the whole, everything that you're looking for. And, if you don't find it, no big deal, because you're not carrying a ton of gear with you and you don't feel like pressure to hit the last 30 minutes of light. I got to get up in a tree. Well, no, you're just sitting right there. Find that spot, get brushed in real quick and get set up.
Think of the people that, it's keeping them from going out in the woods because they got an injury or they can't get in a tree, and it kind of makes them think, that they're not going to have any kind of advantage of deer hunting. Man, throw on a ghillie suit. You're not going to have to. You don't have to climb a tree to kill a deer. They didn't have tree stands years and years ago. Indians. You name it. They've been killing it since the beginning of time. From the ground. So, that's just another tool. The clothing, the ghillie suit. That's just another tool. That you can use to get you closer to the, your deer. So, it's definitely not going to hurt you. And it might help, some people, like especially older people that can't move around as much, just to be able to get out there in the woods, so.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, Todd, appreciate you joining us for episode 600, man. It's been a good time. And listeners, thank y'all for listening to this episode. Appreciate everybody's been sticking around for the podcast and listening to the podcast, especially if you're one of the OGs. Again, like Todd said, he's been listening since episode 1. I don't know. How'd you even find out about the podcast, by the way?
I think I was listening to podcasts already on maybe the Hunt Beast or something, some sort of podcast on iTunes. And I put in Alabama deer hunting, on the search, and y'all's show popped up, and it was just so happened around that same time your first show come out.
Okay, awesome.
Wow.
So, any of you guys like Todd's been listening since about 2018 when we launched the podcast. Appreciate y'all's support all the way through episode 600. Again, 6.5 years through this. Hopefully, we got a lot more years to go. So, appreciate y'all following along with the podcast. Appreciate everybody watching the podcast as well on YouTube. And we'll catch you back here on Thursday's episode from the Southern Outdoorsman podcast. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.